Hello YouTube, Ace here. I'm not going to be doing that much of a video today, but I am going to be sharing with you a little bit of a fail I noticed from the BBC. So apparently they decided to do a war documentary called 14 War Stories, which is supposed to be about the First World War. And when I first saw this, I got rather interested. I didn't realize at first it was a World War I documentary because, you know, the name just didn't quite sell it as that specifically. However, I turned it around at the back, and it does indeed say that it's exclusively about World War I. So, yeah, I was actually rather curious. However, I also noticed something that's actually pretty, well, I'll let you see for yourself. Yeah, now, if you look here, notice what's wrong with this picture. If the documentary is set in World War I, why do they have a picture of U.S. Army soldiers from World War II here? And yeah, that might be a bit of a nitpick issue on theory, but you have to remember this is a documentary. Now, comparatively speaking, when you're looking at movies, especially ones made by Hollywood, there tends to be a lot of liberties taken, and to be fair, that's quite understandable because the purpose of a movie, like the ones you'd expect from Hollywood, is to entertain people, first and foremost, and arguably as well be an artistic value as well. Not necessarily be historically accurate. A similar thing could be argued with video games, of course, and you might notice I'm actually using footage from Battlefield 1 as the background for this video. But it gets actually a little bit different when you're talking about a documentary, because the documentaries are first and foremost supposed to be educational and historically accurate. And to add insult to injury, the simple fact of the matter is that when you screw up on something this basic, like the cover art for your documentary, you've done something wrong. Now, it also leads to other issues as well. For example, yeah, they might have actually done some research into this little documentary, but if they failed on checking the box art to make sure it's properly done, what else have they failed at exactly? And that's a real major issue with documentaries when you don't do them right. This isn't even the first time that the BBC has done something like this. I remember a few years back they made a documentary called Gaddafi and the IRA, which was about, well, the Irish and the British going at it in, I believe, the 80s and 90s, and Gaddafi supplying the Irish with weapons and all that. And they tried to use footage of the IRA shooting down a British Army helicopter. And while there was actual footage of this actually occurring during the war, it turns out that they accidentally instead picked footage from Arma 2. So, yeah, that's a pretty blatant example of the BBC screwing that up. And coming back to that as well, you'd think that the BBC, one of the largest media companies in the world, would be able to actually handle something like this, but apparently not. But yeah, as I've said though about movies like what you'd expect Hollywood to make, yeah, you'd expect them to take liberties. I mean, and they'd still be a good movie. In fact, they'd still be a good historical movie, even. A good example of that would be Patton. A great classic example where, if you actually looked at it, it had a huge historical flaw in theory that the tanks that were used in the making of the movie weren't even actual World War II tanks. They were Patton tanks from the Cold War era. But you can see why they chose to do that, because they're named after Patton, and if the guy's name is essentially synonymous with tanks, well, why not honor his memory a little bit by showing tanks named after him to make the movie? So you can at least defend it in that regard, at least as far as that movie is concerned. You can't quite do that with a documentary. So, yeah, that's all I really wanted to cover. I haven't even watched this thing yet, although I will, of course. So, yeah, hope to catch you guys again soon. Ace out.